How do you know in Dynasty if you are contending or rebuilding? We're going to help you answer that question today. And we answer that question when we do our team blueprints over on flagfantasy.com/domain. We give people what we call a 3-year outlook, because when we talk about Dynasty Fantasy Football and how we play it, we play Dynasty in 3-year windows. So that means we are looking towards the future in 3-year windows. So what's this player going to do for me over the next 3 years? What's this player's value going to do over the next 3 years? And so when we're talking about 3-year outlooks, we assign each and every team that we evaluate a 3-year outlook, and usually we give them one of 3 labels for that year. They're either contending that year, they're rebuilding that year, or they are reloading that year. Yeah. And the most common two are obviously contending or rebuilding. And so let's talk about how to know whether you're contending or whether you're rebuilding on a Dynasty team, and I'll kind of let you start us off here on this.
Yeah. I mean, kind of on top of that idea of contending and rebuilding specifically, right? That's what everyone wants to know, and those are really your 2 natural states of team building, right? Reloading is a little bit of a special situation because it's not necessarily contending or rebuilding focused. It's more like only value focused. It's really just one aspect of the 2 aspects of Dynasty, which are value and contention. But when you're looking at starting a league, this really all starts when you're beginning your Dynasty league, right? And the basic expectation when you start your league and when you're drafting your team in a startup is to contend for at least 2 of the first 3 years. If you're not at least aiming to do that initially, you're playing Dynasty the wrong way. This is why we're not a big fan of the productive struggle teams, right? This is why we talk about this a lot, and we're going to get a lot of pushback on this, and that's fine. I get the idea behind a productive struggle in a draft, and sometimes the value presents itself with the rookie picks and the rookie players in general. But if you're going into your first year expecting to suck and expecting to rebuild, you're already a step behind everyone else. You're essentially just throwing away a year, one of your first 3 years. So your expectation is to contend year 2 and 3. What if that doesn't happen? Then you've donated your buy-in essentially.
I'm going to be brutally honest with people here about this, because the other thing is, like, people draft productive struggle to win in 3 years, which again, if you play in 3-year windows, you're essentially, that's a Dynasty lifetime for us. Like, you are essentially punting for a Dynasty lifetime. And the reality of most situations around most Dynasty leagues, it depends on who you're playing with. If you're a person who's going and playing with your friends and family and you're playing Dynasty, sure, go win in 2 years and there's probably not an issue with that. If you're going and joining random leagues with people on Sleeper or on Reddit or wherever the heck, your league might not last 4 years. That's the truth.
Actually, chances are it probably won't.
That is the absolute truth. Yeah. A lot of times what happens is Dynasty leagues, people, once they see, and look, I'm not advocating for this, and I'm not saying, when we play in Dynasty leagues, we want our Dynasty leagues to last a long time, right? And so that's the right way to play Dynasty. But the wrong way to play Dynasty is setting up a rebuild so far out that there's a greater than 20% chance that your league's not even existing at that point in time.
Right.
So that's why if you're going to rebuild, it's a 1-year rebuild. Yeah. But otherwise, and again, the problem with a productive struggle is not just it's stupid because you're only taking young players. It's stupid because you're taking value, but you're completely blocking off like 40% of the Dynasty market where value could fall to you.
Well, a lot of value accumulation includes veteran proven players as well.
Correct.
Yeah.
So,
and look, all that to say, there are plenty of scenarios where rebuilding is good and a beneficial move given inevitable value fluctuations. But again, let me reinforce, that's going to be after you start your league. That's going to be later on when things happen that you don't expect and you're like, you know what, the best move for me as a team right now is to probably punt for a year. Maybe you're forced to go into a multi-year rebuild and you have to accumulate some more value and get some younger players. That's completely fine. But no one wants to be in a multi-year rebuild, and honestly, you shouldn't want to rebuild at all. So that's really important to remember. The key in Dynasty is aiming to never rebuild, ever. Ever. Now, are you ever going to play Dynasty and never rebuild? Unless you have some ridiculous elite value team, which we've seen before in team blueprints, you're probably inevitably going to have to rebuild. That's the nature of Dynasty, and that's why it's so fun.
So, knowing that problem, we came up with something that was like, okay, if we're not going to rebuild all the time because rebuilding is stupid, then what do? We call it the reload.
The reload.
And the reload basically is the one team building state that is focused purely on value, right? You're talking about getting as much value as you possibly can so that you don't have to rebuild, because rebuilding rebuild teams are completely lacking in value, right? But if you can reload, get value, I mean, it's essentially kind of the restock, like is what I like to call it. You know, you've got your inventory, it's going down, 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 you're losing value. But then before you get past the point of no return where you are heading to hard rebuild territory, you can reload and you can say, stop, I'm going to stop that value bleeding. I'm going to sell off this player that's losing value, sell off this player that's losing value, sell off this player, get some guys that are likely to increase in value and go back up in your value portfolio. Then you have more money. You're essentially just like, I lost enough money, I'm going to save back up, and then I'm going to spend my money again, right? And that's exactly how you should look at a reload. And a reload is basically a Band-Aid so that you don't have to rebuild, because reloads do two things. Number one, they put you in contention again a year after you reload, or number two, they stop you from not contending altogether, because a lot of times you have reloads that are such good value teams, and if you hit on enough of those guys from a production standpoint, you end up being able to make moves to contend that year.
Yes.
That happens so often that we see. And so, again, a lot of people will go and do 2 or 3 year productive struggles. A lot of people, you know, we will assign 2-year hard rebuilds to people but we never, have you ever given out a 3-year hard rebuild or a 3-year rebuild on our?
No.
Never. But you have people playing Dynasty this way, and it brings you back to the basic philosophy of how you approach Dynasty. When you're explaining Dynasty to somebody in the simplest terms, a lot of times what you say, it's like, it's a multi-year fantasy football league, and you're like, oh, that makes sense. And so a lot of people, when they first learn what Dynasty is and think about it, they're like, okay,
I'm gonna win.
Then I'm just gonna, I'm gonna win. I'm gonna get Tyreek Hill. I'm gonna go get Devontae Adams. I'm gonna go get productive running backs like Jonathan Taylor.
Yeah.
And they draft a almost redraft team. And then everybody laughs at them. And there is some laughing to occur there, because in a couple of years, they're probably not going to have very much value. But what ends up happening a lot of times is you have people that draft like that, like it's a multi-year redraft, and they end up winning 2 of 3 of the first 2 years.
Yeah.
And you have 2 championships in your dynasty.
And by the time they understand how Dynasty really works and the different elements of it, then they're schooling their league anyways, and they've already won 2 championships to
and
go
so
with it.
What we do is they're like, okay, Dynasty is just a multi-year fantasy league. And then you have all of these Twitter people and all of these YouTube people, and they're like, oh no, Dynasty is actually where you have to collect young players and picks. It's all about young players and picks. And I'm like, no. Because you win a dynasty league the same exact way you win a fantasy league, and that's by scoring points, right? So I don't think it's a bad idea to think about your dynasty leagues as multi-year redraft leagues, right? And then, contend until you can't. But instead of rebuilding, just reload. Repurpose
your assets. That's what we love about reloading. And that's why, honestly, that team archetype is probably my favorite realistic archetype to give out when we do team blueprints for people over at flockfantasy.com/domain. And if you want one of those team blueprints, if you want customizable team analysis that we personally give to you about your team, then go over to flockfantasy.com/domain. You have to use code domain, sign up for the Mother Flocker tier, and you will get one of these awesome blue things.
Whoa!
Just like our blue background and everything.
And
a blue
We're
Colt,
very blue people.
Super blue.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Go horse.
Blue.
But we will give you all the advice that you want, all the advice that you need. You can slide into our DMs, ask us follow-up questions. We give you all the advice that you could ever dream of, plus all of our exclusives, our rankings, our our redraft guide.
That's coming
out
you
very,
get the trade calculator, you get the articles, you get the ADP database, you get all of it.
Yep.
So like you said, code domain, baby.
Yeah, and that one year reload is just, I can't tell you how fun it is to determine when I'm looking at a team, hey, this is a team where I'm asking you to repurpose for a year because you're going to be so better off in the long run. And sometimes it can be tough because while we do love contending and while we do love winning leagues, there is a lot of risk to having veteran players right now like Devontae Adams and Mike Evans, for example. If those are your top 2 wide receivers, you could win your league in 2024 and you could be bottom 6.
Yeah.
So if it's really that much of a volatile situation, just go move off some of those guys. Like, that's kind of a practical example for you. How do I know if I'm contending or rebuilding? There's a practical example of how you're reloading. When you're looking at some of the naturally occurring 3-year outlooks, like we said, we look at Dynasty in 3-year windows. So on our blueprints, for example, we do a 3-year outlook for every single team. And that 3-year outlook directly correlates with the team archetype that we assign you.
Yes.
So this is a really easy way to remember it, okay? And this applies to every single archetype that we have. There's 8 archetypes. There are 4 naturally occurring 3-year outlooks, okay? We call them the core 4. Then there's 2 extreme outlooks that lie within the core 4, and then 1 special outlook. Let's start with the core 4. The first one is going to be year 1 contending, year 2 contending, and year 3 reloading. You could call that a 1-year rebuild if you want, a 1-year retool year. It's a reload. That's what we like to call it. And this is really the ideal life cycle of a dynasty team.
Yep.
You're intending to contend as long as you possibly can when you start your league, and then your third year, you're going to repurpose and make your team last longer than you originally expected. This can really be in any order you want. If you're 3 or 4 years into your dynasty league and you're like, well, I'm probably 1 year away from reloading, contend, reload, contend, same idea, right? The idea is you want to be contending for 2/3 of the dynasty life cycle and repurposing assets and accumulating value for the extra third. Common team archetypes that really go in, that tie into this are dual elite QB. What are quarterbacks in a Superflex league? They are very, very insulated. You know for a fact that if you have 2 elite producing quarterbacks on your team, you are more likely than not going to be contending for 2 of those 3 years. Elite value. We know for a fact that if you have elite value, the best of the best at every single position, plus maybe even a ton of rookie picks as well, you're at least a top-notch contender for 2 of the next 3 years. Sometimes, and we'll allude to the extreme ones later, but contend, that happens too. Wide receiver factory as well, okay? This is like that cluster of top 3, the most value-insulated, valuable teams in Dynasty Fantasy Football. Dual elite QB, elite value, wide receiver factory. What do we talk about wide receivers all the time in Dynasty, right? Next to quarterbacks, they are the most value-insulated position in Dynasty Fantasy Football, and you're going to be looking at a situation like this as well. You want your team to look like this.
Yeah. Let's look at the next couple here. Rebuild, contend, and contend. This is teams a lot of times that don't have good depths, that have decent building blocks, but they need another year of value insulation or value accumulation. And so when you're looking at teams like future value teams, dual elite QBs can actually be rebuild, contend. Why? Because you see the dual elite QB build straddle that rebuild, contend line. And so it's like, which one can it go? You can have a dual elite QB that can be on the verge of contending. You have dual elite QBs that are also on the verge of rebuilding. It happens both ways.
Right. And how is that possible? Because the quarterback position in Superflex leagues, for one QB, this is elite quarterback tight end. They are the skeleton of the way that you build your dynasty
of any
team.
type of
So
team.
you start with that position. Once you have it locked in, you spend another year building up the rest of your positions to then contend for the following multiple years.
Yeah. So again, this is our ideal rebuild right here. This is if you have to don't rebuild. Like if we had a motto, one of our mottos would be don't rebuild. Don't rebuild. You don't need to. If you do need to, you rebuild for 1 year. Multi-year rebuilds are a scam. Don't forget it. You heard it here first.
Don't try it.
Other channels will tell you, rebuild, do this, do that. Rebuild, if you have to rebuild for 1 year and then contend. The rebuild, contend puts us where we are doing what we have to, but getting ultimately where we need to go, and that's trying to win money in our Dynasty Leagues. Again, I cannot stress this enough. We make Dynasty about having the sexiest players, having the youngest players, having the most rookie picks, having the whole first round, and blah, 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 and it doesn't matter. Having the most young players doesn't win you money. Having the most rookie picks doesn't win you money. None of it matters. The only thing that wins you actual cash that goes in your wallet that you can spend transactionally, American currency, US dollars, the only thing that can do that is winning with fantasy points. That's the only thing. That's it. Jameson Williams is not winning you a Dynasty Championship. Tyreek Hill is. But even on that note, Tyler Lockett's giving you a better shot than J-Mo is right now because Tyler Lockett is scoring you points to win you money.
That's pretty cool.
It's bonkers because it's about building the sexiest roster. And like, oh, look at my Dynasty Daddy. Look at my Dynasty Daddy. I don't give a crap about your Dynasty Daddy. I care. Did you win your league?
I care about your Dynasty money.
Exactly. I don't care about... There's so many things that it's gotten kind of... I don't know what the word is. Touristy is... What am I thinking? Like, corny? I don't know. Just win. Just win. Sorry, I went on a baby rant there.
Yeah,
but
this is so fun. I feel like this is around the same time. This is around the same time as last year when the money is cool phrase was tooled for the first time. But look, with that concept in mind, one of the most common team archetypes that you're going to see that wins a championship is a well-rounded team, right? Well-rounded is like the poster child for a 3-year outlook that is contend year 1, contend year 2, and probably rebuild year 3, right? We don't say reload year 3 because what do you inevitably sacrifice when you get contending assets in Dynasty? probably a significant amount of value volatility.
Volume.
So when you're looking at this 3-year outlook, again, it's just a little bit of a step down from what you have at the elite value wide receiver factory, dual elite QB area on the higher end from a value perspective, because you have productive assets, solid cornerstone assets probably as well, but you are going to have a little bit of a questionable future. So again, it's kind of a little bit of a nuance there, because what's really the difference between a reload and a 1-year rebuild? Well, sometimes that 1-year rebuild can turn into maybe a multi-year rebuild if some of the assets that you're retooling didn't really work out. Or maybe you ended up, some of your contending assets that you've had the first 2 years that contributed to you winning championships really ended up losing a ton of value. That's just a reality of contending, and we admit that for sure. And then the last of the core 4 rebuilds, or one of the last of the core 4 3-year outlooks that we have here, is the dreaded hard rebuild sort of range, which is year 1 rebuild, year 2 rebuild, and year 3 hopefully contend. There are some teams that we've seen that are so value deficient where it's like you're going to be on the line of contending and rebuilding even in year 3 because you don't have any future picks right now and you don't have any startable assets. Like that is possible, and that does happen. That's going to be one of your extreme outlooks for sure, is that 3-year rebuild. But again, we in the times that we've done hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of blueprints, we have never given out a 3-year rebuild. It's always the best thing, the best light at the end of the tunnel when you're in a multi-year hard rebuild is that you know for a fact that you're always getting value injected to your team because of the picks that you're getting every single year. Even if you're out of first and you have only seconds and thirds or only thirds and fourths, it's a little bit of value, and it's all about small value wins. You can recover. You always can.
I mean, even the worst teams we've ever seen, if you make enough moves and you make enough trades, you can get out of any hole you need to.
Yeah.
You really can.
Yep.
But you have to start. It's like the Office episode where Dwight takes the what is he trying to do? Like I forget what he has, but he tries to barter it for everything and ends up with the magic beans at the end because he ends up with the telescope, but then he gets the magic beans. You know who the magic beans are? You know who that is? Who's the magic beans player of Dynasty? Do you think?
I don't know. Puka?
No, Puka actually worked. No, never mind. But anyways, it's like that.
Well, tell me, who is the magic beans player of Dynasty?
Who is the Magic Beans player? I actually don't know.
You got to tell me.
I was wondering if you would come up with one.
I don't know.
I
was having a hard time.
Somebody tell us in the comments who the Magic Beans player of Dynasty is, because there's definitely one that I just can't think of. Who is it? Jerry Jeudy, maybe? Like,
oh my gosh.
Like, that's a decent one. But
it's just Justin Fields.
There you go. That's true.
But he had actual value.
Well, that's good. He had value.
Identity theft is not a joke, Jim.
Great show. The flip side of that is contend. And this one we do give out, actually.
Yeah. That's an extreme outlook, though.
But we see teams that are really, really, really good. And we tend to be more optimistic with teams that are good than we are pessimistic with teams that are really bad. With teams that are really bad, we're like, you could do this. With teams that are really good, we're like, just sit tight. And you can be a contend. This is the insane elite value teams. Top of the DVM. Best teams we see, for sure. So, and then we have the special outlook.
Yeah, I call this the special outlook because technically it's not really naturally occurring. We already talked about how unique reloads are, and this is really, the special outlook is the 1-year reload. This is kind of a cheat because this 3-year outlook is the same as one of the 8 team archetypes that we have, which is close to the hard rebuild line. It is more in the value deficient area because why are you reloading? You're getting rid of volume.
If you say volume...
Volume volatility, and you're trying to get rid of that volatility to get long-term promise on your team. This is the special outlook, and the reason this is special is because, again, what is the risk of reloading? We keep talking about it like it's the best thing you could ever do, and it is. There is risk still with reloading because technically reloading, you could argue, is like a 1-year rebuild because you're not really aiming to contend this year. Now, you could end up contending if you reload in a really effective way.
You could say a reload is a rebuild done right.
Yes. Yeah, that's very good.
But
really sometimes reloads can go wrong because sometimes the assets that you invest in,
lose value.
We're not geniuses, just like you aren't. We're the same as you. We're trying to play Dynasty and trying to win our leagues, and we're trying to accumulate value. And sometimes the shots we take on guys who have value upside don't work out.
Treylon Burks.
And it sucks. Treylon Burks was a big guy to invest in if you were a 1-year reload the last couple of years.
Especially if you watched our channel.
Rip. Don't say we don't take our L's. Good gosh.
No.
And that could have been the reason that you ended up in a multi-rebuild if you heavily invested in a guy like him and a guy like Jameson Williams of recent, and a guy like who else am I thinking of that was a really good investment? Christian Watson. Oh my gosh, the Christian Watson prices were insane.
Antonio Gibson 2 years ago, third, fourth round.
Jahan Dotson was pretty expensive too. He was worth 23 first just a year ago.
Yeah. So again, and we assign a 3-year outlook to every team. And to us, the 3-year outlook is pivotal for deciding what moves to make for your dynasty team. Once you have a plan, and having a plan is important, but once you have a plan, you really can act on that plan and make trades that are specifically geared towards meeting your goal. And what's the goal?
Win your leagues.
The goal is to win your leagues, guys. I don't ever want to get it twisted.
Did you catch that from him?
Right. Yeah. Did you get that? Did you get that in the video from me? But I haven't gotten that fired up in a long time. I was
gonna say I thought I was gonna be the fired up one for this
that
video,
just makes me
and
so
you just
mad.
all of a sudden went off. I was like,
because it's all the freaking Twitter brainiacs too. I'm like, gosh, I can't even get on Twitter with dynasty people anymore because it's a cesspool of everybody kissing each other's butts and
for every
whatever.
Kyron Williams and Isaiah Pacheco, there's Isaiah Spiller and
but guys,
Zach Evans.
And there are lots of good dynasty channels out there and lots of good people that create dynasty content. Absolutely. And a lot that are better than us. We are stupid. But the one thing that I think that we do pretty well is we focus on actually winning dynasty leagues because that's the goal. That really is the goal, and you can only do so much to get there, but I think establishing a plan really helps you do that. So do us a huge favor. If you play Dynasty, and if you want to get your team evaluated, find your 3-year outlook and start making trades according to your 3-year outlook so you can hit your goals. flockfantasy.com/domain. If you use code domain, you have to do that. If you choose the Mother Flocker tier, you are going to get one of these. We are going to give you a 3-year outlook, and from then on, every single trade that you make for your Dynasty team is going towards a goal in the future that you have in mind. Every single one. And every trade should be thought of through a lens of how is this going to affect me next year? How is this going to affect me in 2 years? And what do I want to be doing? If you know you're going to be reloading, you know you're going to be reloading.
That's why we don't like 1-for-1 trades.
It's exactly like I had to explain that to somebody on our TikTok, and he was not getting it. I was like, well, never mind. But all right, like and subscribe, guys, if you play Dynasty. We appreciate you guys. Thanks so much for joining us, and we'll see you later.